I'm broken in every way. The morning light spilled through the window, but it brought no warmth. It never did, not anymore. The weight of the blankets felt like an anchor, pulling me deeper into the mattress as if the world itself conspired to keep me trapped in place. Every part of me felt heavy, a constant reminder that I wasn't just tired, I was exhausted in ways sleep couldn't fix. I rolled onto my side, staring at the wall that had been the backdrop to countless mornings like this. The familiar cracks in the plaster, the faded paint, the shadow of furniture long since rearranged, they all seemed to mock me. They were unmoving and changing while I was falling apart, piece by piece. It wasn't always like this. I could remember days when I felt alive, even if they felt like they belonged to someone else now. There was a time when I would spring out of bed, fueled by plans and ideas, driven by dreams I believed in. I used to be someone who mattered, someone with purpose. Now, I was just this. Getting up was an act of will. The ache in my joints wasn't physical, it was the strain of carrying something unseen. The hollow pit in my stomach reminded me I hadn't eaten much in days, but the thought of food was as unappealing as everything else. I shuffled to the bathroom, catching my reflection in the mirror. The face staring back was unfamiliar. Dark circles framed dull eyes, the sparkle they once held extinguished. My skin looked pale, as though it too had given up. I reached up, brushing hair out of my face, and my hand trembled. It was a small betrayal, one among many. I turned away quickly, unable to meet my own gaze any longer. What was the point? There was nothing there worth looking at. The day stretched before me like an endless desert, barren and unforgiving. I sat in the same chair I always did, the one by the window, watching the world go on without me. Cars passed, people walked by, birds perched on telephone wires. It all felt so distant, like I was observing life from behind a thick pane of glass. I wanted to feel connected to it, to reach out and touch it, but I couldn't. I scrolled through my phone mindlessly, though I wasn't truly looking at anything. Social media was a parade of lives that seemed brighter, fuller, more meaningful than mine. Friends getting married, starting families, achieving career milestones. Even the mundane post-someone's dinner, a sunset, a pet doing something silly felt like a cruel reminder of how far removed I was from ordinary happiness. The messages I hadn't responded to piled up, each one a testament to relationships I was failing to maintain. Are you okay? Haven't heard from you in a while. Let me know if you need anything. I wanted to answer. I really did, but the words felt trapped in my throat. What could I say? That I was broken, that I didn't know how to fix myself. Afternoon crept in, and with it, the oppressive silence of my apartment grew louder. I tried to distract myself, television, music, anything, but nothing could fill the void. The shows I used to enjoy felt shallow, their plots predictable. Songs that once lifted my spirits now felt like background noise to the relentless hum of my thoughts. I wandered into the kitchen, opening cupboards out of habit. The emptiness inside matched how I felt. A single can of soup, a stale loaf of bread, a box of cereal I didn't remember buying. The fridge hummed softly, its contents just as uninspiring. I closed it, without taking anything out. By evening, the shadows in the room grew longer, creeping across the floor like they were trying to swallow me whole. I sat on the couch, my hands resting limply in my lap. Memories floated to the surface, unbeaten times when I laughed so hard my sides ached, when I stayed up late talking with friends, when I felt like I belonged somewhere. The contrast between then and now was unbearable. It wasn't just that I was sad, it was that I couldn't see a way out. Weight I carried wasn't something I could put down or share. It was woven into the fabric of who I was, and no matter how hard I tried to unravel it, the threads remained tangled. Night came, bringing with it the familiar dread of another sleepless stretch. I climbed into bed, though I knew rest wouldn't come easily. My mind raced with the same questions it always did. What's wrong with me? Why can't I fix this? Why am I like this? Tears came then, unbidden and unstoppable. They soaked the pillow, but I didn't bother wiping them away. Crying didn't bring relief anymore. It was just another reminder of how broken I felt. As I lay there in the dark, the ceiling above me a blank canvas for my thoughts, I tried to find a flicker of hope, some reason to believe tomorrow might be different. But all I could feel was the weight of everything I'd lost: my drive, my purpose, my connection to the world. I didn't know how to move forward, and I didn't know how to stay where I was. All I knew was that I was broken in every way that mattered, and I couldn't see a way to put the pieces back together. The tears eventually dried on their own, leaving a faint, salty trail across my cheeks. I lay motionless in the dark, feeling the sticky heaviness of my emotions settle into my chest. The house was silent, the kind of silence that felt suffocating rather than peaceful. Even the hum of the refrigerator or the distant sound of a car passing by wasn't enough to pierce the quiet. It was, during these hours, the in-between of night and dawn, that the weight of my brokenness felt most unbearable. The thoughts that haunted me during the day became louder, sharper, and more cruel. They tore through any semblance of self-worth I had left, whispering that I was a failure, a burden, and undeserving of the things I longed for. I clenched the sheets tightly, as though holding on to something tangible might tether me to reality. But it felt futile. The darkness had a way of amplifying everything: my loneliness, my regret, my self-loathing. I tried to remember the last time I had felt light, the last time I had smiled without forcing it, the last time I had laughed without it feeling hollow. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else. Morning eventually arrived, though it brought no relief. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting golden rays through the window, but they only served to highlight the mess of my life: the dishes I hadn't washed, the clothes I hadn't folded, the unopened mail that piled up on the counter. Each neglected task felt like evidence of my failure, a reminder of how far I had let myself fall. I pulled myself out of bed, my movements sluggish and robotic. The bathroom mirror greeted me with the same reflection as always, though I barely glanced at it this time. What was the point? I didn't recognize that person anymore. As I shuffled through my morning routine, or what little remained of it, I felt a pang of longing for the person I used to be. I thought about how I used to take pride in my appearance, how I used to plan out my days with enthusiasm, how I used to approach life with a sense of curiosity and hope. That version of me felt like a stranger now, someone I could admire but never reach again. The day dragged on, each hour blending into the next. I tried to distract myself with small tasks, but even the simplest things felt insurmountable. Washing a single dish felt like climbing a mountain. Checking my email felt like opening a door to a room filled with judgment and expectation. I avoided both. Instead, I sat by the window again, watching the world pass me by. A couple walked hand in hand down the street, their laughter audible even through the glass. A dog chased a squirrel across a yard, its tail wagging furiously. A delivery driver stopped to drop off a package at a neighbor's house. Life moved on, oblivious to the stagnant pool I was drowning in. At some point, I opened my phone again, scrolling aimlessly. Social media was a minefield, but I couldn't seem to stop myself from diving into it. Post after post of accomplishments, milestones, and joyful moments filled my screen. It felt like the universe was mocking me, reminding me of all the things I would never have. Eventually, I came across an old photo buried in my gallery. It was from years ago, me at a park with friends, the sun setting behind us, our faces lit up with laughter. I stared at it for a long time, tracing the contours of my younger self. I barely recognized that person. They looked so carefree, so full of life. I wondered if they would be ashamed of who I had become. The thought stayed with me for the rest of the day, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I tried to shake it off, but it lingered like a shadow, following me into the evening. By the time night fell, I was back in bed, staring at the ceiling once again. And yet, as I lay there, something small and quiet stirred within me. It wasn't hope, not yet, but maybe the faintest whisper of something adjacent to it. A question, simple and persistent: what if it doesn't have to be this way forever? I didn't have an answer. I didn't have a plan. But the question stayed with me, threading its way through the darkness. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I wondered if there might still be a way to piece myself back together. The question haunted me, as if it had embedded itself in my chest, whispering its quiet insistence whenever I tried to push it away. What if it doesn't have to be this way forever? It was small, fragile, almost laughable in its simplicity, but it refused to be ignored. The next morning, I found myself lingering by the mirror longer than usual. My reflection hadn't changed overnight, still the same dull eyes, the same weary face, but something about the way I looked at myself felt different. Maybe it was the question. Maybe it was something deeper. I didn't know. Instead of sinking back into the usual pattern of avoiding my thoughts and tasks, I opened a notebook that had been collecting dust on a shelf. The blank pages stared at me, intimidating in their emptiness. My pen hovered over the paper for several minutes, my mind racing to find the right words. Finally, I wrote, "What if?" It felt insignificant at first, but as I stared at those two words, they started to mean something more. What if I tried? What if I reached out to someone? What if I just got through today and worried about tomorrow? When it came, I decided to start small. I made my bed. It wasn't much, but seeing the sheets smoothed out and the pillows fluffed gave me a fleeting sense of control. Next, I opened the fridge and forced myself to eat something, a piece of toast with butter. It didn't taste particularly good, but it was food, and I had made the effort. The afternoon brought its usual heaviness, but this time, I pushed back. I opened the curtains wide, letting the sunlight flood the room. The brightness stung my eyes, but it also felt like a reminder that the world was still out there, waiting. As the days went on, I started to let the what-ifs guide me. They weren't monumental changes, just small acts of defiance against the inertia that had taken hold of me. I drank a full glass of water. I responded to one of the unread messages on my phone, apologizing for my silence. I even took a short walk around the block, my legs shaky from disuse but grateful for the movement. It wasn't easy. For every step forward, there were days when I felt like I was sliding back. The self-doubt crept in, telling me that these efforts were pointless, that I would never escape the void. But I tried to silence those voices with small victories. One day, I called my mother. It wasn't a long conversation, just a few minutes of catching up, but the sound of her voice reminded me that I wasn't as alone as I felt. Another day, I signed up for an online support group, though I didn't say anything at first. Just seeing others share their stories made me feel a little less isolated. As weeks turned into months, the changes started to feel more tangible. I found part-time work doing something simple but meaningful, and for the first time in ages, I felt like I was contributing to something. I started journaling regularly, pouring my thoughts onto the page in a way that felt cathartic and freeing. There were setbacks, of course, nights when the darkness returned with a vengeance, wrapping itself around me like a suffocating blanket, days when getting out of bed still felt impossible. But each time, I reminded myself of the question that had started it all: what if it doesn't have to be this way forever? Slowly, I began to believe that maybe it didn't. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the sunset, I realized the heaviness in my chest wasn't as suffocating as it once had been. The colors in the sky, soft pinks and fiery oranges, felt vibrant in a way I hadn't noticed before. I let myself take it in, savoring the moment for what it was. I wasn't fixed, I wasn't healed, but I was trying. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The sunset faded into twilight, and the room dimmed around me, but I stayed seated by the window. There was something comforting about the rhythm of day turning to night, an inevitability that mirrored the subtle changes in my life. Progress wasn't immediate or dramatic, it was slow, like the changing colors of the sky, but it was there if I paid attention. That night, sleep came a little easier. It wasn't perfect, I still woke up once or twice, my mind restless, but it wasn't the suffocating insomnia that used to plague me. When I finally opened my eyes to the morning light, I didn't feel the familiar dread of facing another day. Instead, there was a faint hum of curiosity. What might today hold? It was another small shift, but it mattered. I leaned into routines, finding comfort in the small rituals of daily life: drinking coffee, became an anchor, the warmth of the mug in my hands grounding me as I planned my day. I started taking longer walks, exploring streets I had ignored for years. I found myself noticing little details I would have overlooked before: the way sunlight filtered through the trees, the smell of freshly baked bread wafting from a nearby bakery, the chatter of birds on power lines. Some days, I even managed to smile. The online support group became a lifeline. At first, I was just an observer, reading the posts and marveling at the bravery of strangers sharing their struggles and triumphs. But one evening, I took a deep breath and wrote my own post. It wasn't long, just a few sentences about how I had felt lost for so long but was trying to find my way back. The responses were overwhelming. People offered encouragement, shared similar experiences, and reminded me that I wasn't alone. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt seen. It gave me the courage to reach out to an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. I expected rejection or indifference, but instead, they welcomed me back with open arms. We talked about everything and nothing, and for the first time in a long while, I laughed, a real and guarded laugh that startled me with its sincerity. Not every connection was easy to rebuild. Some people had moved on, and that hurt, but I learned to accept it. I couldn't change the past, but I could focus on the present. As the months passed, I began to tackle bigger challenges. I started researching job opportunities, applying to positions that felt within reach. The first few rejections stung, but I kept going, bolstered by the small victories I had already achieved. Eventually, I landed a part-time job at a local library. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me a sense of purpose and a routine to hold on to. With that stability, I set another goal: learning to drive. It was terrifying at first. Sitting behind the wheel made my palms sweat, and every turn felt like a potential disaster. But I stuck with it, taking lessons and practicing until the fear began to fade. The day I passed my driving test was monumental. It wasn't just about the license, it was about proving to myself that I was capable of growth, that I wasn't as stuck as I had once believed. By the time a full year had passed, I could look back and see just how far I'd come. I wasn't the same person who had stared at the ceiling night after night, paralyzed by despair. I was still healing, still learning, still finding my way, but I was moving forward. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the sunset, I felt a quiet sense of pride. The colors in the sky were as beautiful as ever, but this time, I didn't just observe them, I felt them. The warmth, the vibrancy, the promise of another day. I wasn't broken anymore. I was whole in a way I never thought possible. And though the journey wasn't over, I knew I could face whatever came next. The transformation wasn't linear, but it was steady. Each day brought new challenges, and some days still felt like a step backward. But those setbacks no longer defined me. Instead of drowning in them, I had learned to wade through, carrying the knowledge that I had survived worse and could survive again. The job at the library became more than just a paycheck. It became a sanctuary. The quiet aisles of books, the hum of the air conditioner, the soft conversations of patrons, it was a world where I could breathe. The routine of shelving books, assisting visitors, and occasionally finding a moment to skim through a novel gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. There was one particular day at the library that stuck with me. A child, no older than 7, came in with her father. She was clutching a tattered copy of a book she'd borrowed before, her face glowing with excitement as she asked if we had more like it. Her enthusiasm was infectious. I helped her find the next book in the series, and when she hugged it to her chest, I felt an unexpected warmth bloom in my chest. Moments like that began to pepper my days, small reminders that life wasn't just about surviving, it could also be about connection and joy. The driving, too, opened doors I hadn't realized were closed. For the first time, I could leave the confines of my neighborhood, exploring parks, museums, and quiet country roads. The freedom was exhilarating, and it brought with it a newfound independence that I had long thought unattainable. I even reconnected with family, cautiously at first. I called my sibling on a whim one evening, expecting the awkwardness of years of distance. Instead, they answered with genuine happiness to hear from me, and our conversation stretched late into the night. We talked about everything we'd missed in each other's lives, and though the years apart couldn't be erased, we found a way to move forward. As my world grew larger, so did my confidence. I began setting more ambitious goals, not just about work or skills, but about my personal growth. I started therapy, diving into the tangled mess of emotions and experiences I had avoided for so long. It wasn't easy, facing the truths I'd buried, but it was liberating. For the first time, I had the tools to untangle the web of my mind and understand myself better. The whispers of self-doubt didn't vanish entirely, but their grip on me loosened. I learned to counter them with compassion, reminding myself of how far I'd come. One night, while journaling, I stumbled across the question I had written months ago: what if? Beneath it, I added a new entry: I'm not where I want to be, but I'm no longer where I was. That matters. And it did. As the seasons changed, so did I. The world around me seemed brighter, more alive, because I was finally open to seeing it. I noticed the crispness of autumn air, the way leaves crunched underfoot, the smell of rain-soaked earth. I celebrated the small victories, making it through a tough week, completing a project at work, or simply taking time to care for myself. And then, one day, something extraordinary happened. I woke up and realized that the heaviness in my chest, the weight I had carried for so long, was gone. In its place was a quiet, steady calm. It wasn't euphoria or perfection, it was acceptance. Acceptance of my journey, my scars, my strengths, and the person I had become. I wasn't broken. I wasn't behind. I was enough. The realization hit me like the sunrise after a long, dark night. I sat on the edge of my bed, letting the tears come. But this time, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of release, of gratitude, of hope. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I would meet it with open arms. The journey wasn't over, it never truly is, but I was ready to keep walking. One step at a time, one day at a time, moving forward into the life I was finally ready to live.